They made me train a new guy making double my pay. HR said, "We pay based on vibe." He kept stealing my scripts and screwing them up, so I hid a tracer in one file. When it broke everything, they had to beg me for the fix. I was standing in the middle of the conference room in our downtown Dallas office, watching the project meltdown unfolding on the giant screen like it was some sick joke. Every dependency was red. Every script was failing. The entire deployment pipeline was frozen. And everyone, my manager, the director, the two clueless PMs, was staring at me like I'd just set the building on fire. Meanwhile, the new guy, Evan, sat there with his overpriced cold brew, tapping his pen like he wasn't the reason this whole mess existed. And then the director said the line that still makes my stomach tighten. "We need you to fix this. You're the only one who understands the system." No kidding. I built half of it myself, but none of them knew the real reason why every component failure was pointing back to one very specific file. And none of them knew I had placed a tracer inside that file 2 weeks ago. A tracer only I could see, only I could interpret, and only I could fix. They just knew everything was exploding. And they knew Evan, Mr. here on a vibe salary, had been the one responsible for the final merge. He kept glancing at me, the way a kid looks at the teacher before admitting they stole something. But he didn't speak. He never did when things actually mattered. He'd float on his positive energy and his stupid HR-approved smile while everyone else cleaned up after him. Looking at the broken deployment, all I could think about was how this whole mess started 8 weeks earlier, the day my manager told me I'd be training someone at double my salary. I actually laughed. I thought it was a joke. But HR sat me down, crossed their arms, and said, word for word, "We don't pay based on effort, we pay based on vibe. Your new hire has an executive vibe." Like I was supposed to swallow that with a smile. They handed me his training schedule, then they walked him right into my workspace. I had to teach him everything, my workflows, my scripts, my templates. And every single time he screwed something up and a ticket came in, he'd immediately say, "Oh yeah, I think she set it up that way." Like throwing my name under the bus was his natural reflex. At first, I swallowed it. I thought maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I was imagining the way he'd slide my work into his reports. Maybe it was just onboarding chaos. But then he started copying entire chunks of my scripts, down to the comments. He even misspelled things exactly the way I did on bad days. And still, management acted like he was some kind of rising star. I kept quiet. I told myself to be the bigger person. I reminded myself it was just a job. But then came the incident, the one that made me put the tracer in the critical file. The memory hit me hard as the team kept begging me to jump in and save the deliverable. I looked at the director. His voice was cracking now. "We need you to resolve this before the client call at 3 p.m. You're the only one who understands the architecture." Evan was staring at his hands. HR was already messaging me privately like I was some kind of firefighter they could yank out of bed. And I stood there with a decision burning in my chest. Because they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know what Evan had done. They didn't know what the tracer had already confirmed. And they definitely didn't know what I was about to do next. I took a breath, looked around the room, then I said, very calmly, "Before I fix anything, you need to hear what actually happened." And the whole room went silent. I guess the only way to explain how everything spiraled is to start with the day Evan walked into our office like he owned half of downtown Dallas. It was a Monday morning, already humid, and I was halfway through my first coffee when my manager pinged me. "Come to HR, bring your onboarding notes." I thought someone new was joining the team, sure, but I didn't expect what came next. They had Evan sitting in one of those soft HR chairs, the ones they use when they're trying too hard to look friendly. He was smiling like he'd won something. HR introduced him like he was a celebrity. "This is Evan. He'll be shadowing you." I nodded, totally normal. Then my manager said, "He'll be taking a senior-level role, and we want you to train him." I wasn't a senior. I wasn't even mid-level on paper, even though I'd been doing mid-level work for 2 years. I swallowed hard. "What's the pay range?" I asked dumbly, like I didn't already feel the floor tilt beneath me. HR glanced at each other, this annoyed little flicker in their eyes. "Compensation is confidential," one of them said. But Evan, being Evan, leaned forward and said, "Oh, I don't mind sharing. I'm starting at," and then he said a number that made my chest go hot, Double my salary, exactly double. I looked at HR, they didn't blink. I've been here longer, I said slowly. I've already built most of our internal systems. Why am I training someone at twice my pay? That's when the HR woman did her little fake sympathy smile and said the sentence that would haunt me for weeks. We don't pay based on effort, we pay based on vibe. Vibe. Like my skills were some optional accessory. Like consistency and actual work didn't matter. Like Evan's haircut and trendy sneakers meant more than the years I'd spent keeping our systems from collapsing. They gave me a printout of his training plan. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of me giving him everything he needed to take credit for my work. I wish I could say I refused. I wish I could say I stood up for myself right then. But I didn't, I needed the job. Rent doesn't care about vibes, so I trained him, and right away I noticed things. He copied everything, not learned copied, word for word. Command for command, template for template. He'd ask me how to handle a scenario, write it down exactly, then run to show our manager what he had built. Then the small screw-ups started. A broken path here, a missing variable there. A crash loop that made no sense until I realized he'd edited one of my files without understanding what any of it did. Every time something broke, he blamed me. Oh, she must have changed something. Oh, she set up that environment. Oh, she didn't explain that part clearly. And management believed him, not because what he said made sense, but because he said it with confidence, with vibe. Meanwhile, my workload doubled. I was fixing his mistakes while still doing my own tasks. Some nights I stayed until 9 p.m. because he'd push something terrible to production at 4:45 and leave early for self-care. I told myself it would blow over. That once he got the hang of things, I'd get my time back. But then he crossed the one line I didn't think he'd touch. He pushed a commit, one that looked suspiciously like a chunk of code I'd been drafting privately. Not in our repo. Not even on the company laptop. My personal draft, my style, my comments. I stared at it for a long time, this cold certainty sinking in. He'd found a way into a directory he had no access to. And suddenly, I understood exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. That was the night I created the tracer. Because I knew something worse was coming. By the time week 5 rolled in, the office felt different, tenser, heavier, like everyone else could sense something was off, even if they couldn't name it. Evan kept drifting around the workspace like some golden child who never had to face consequences. Meanwhile, I was drowning in quiet panic. The tracer I'd created sat buried deep inside one of our most sensitive files. Not malicious, not harmful on its own, just a silent witness. A digital fingerprint. If anyone made unauthorized edits, it would log the user, timestamp, and the exact lines touched. Completely invisible unless you knew where to look. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I planned revenge back then, but because I needed a way to protect myself in case things kept spiraling. And they did. Fast. Evan's training was technically over, but instead of transitioning into independence, he seemed more glued to me than ever. He'd hover behind my chair, asking questions he should have known by week 2. He'd intercept emails meant for me and answer them with half-truths. He even started holding private calls with our manager, calls I was conveniently left out of. Then came the Friday incident. We had a deployment scheduled for a client in Austin. Simple upgrade, nothing dramatic. I had prepped the scripts, documented everything, and told Evan to leave the files alone unless we reviewed them together. At 4:17 p.m., right when half the office was mentally checked out for the weekend, he pushed a commit into the main branch. My phone buzzed, build failed, again, and again, and again. I opened the logs. The failure pointed directly to the file containing the tracer. He had touched it, unauthorized, reckless, and worse, he had replaced 3 variable names with ones that didn't exist anywhere else in the system. It was like watching someone rewrite the wiring of a house while standing in a puddle. I walked over to his desk. "What did you push?" He gave me that same breezy smile. "Just some cleanup." It needed my touch. My touch. Like the last month hadn't proved he could barely keep a template straight. The build was unsalvageable. I stayed late again, backtracking his changes, patching the immediate issues, and trying to minimize the damage. But the tracer had logged everything, including something I hadn't expected. His username wasn't the only one in the file. There was a second login, someone from management. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe a cached credential, maybe something harmless. But the tracer doesn't glitch. The next Monday, things escalated even more. Evan showed up to the morning stand-up wearing this smug expression, and my manager kept glancing at him like they shared a secret. When it came time to assign tasks, suddenly half of my responsibilities were handed to him to help him grow. Oddly specific tasks. Tasks directly connected to the sensitive file. Tasks he shouldn't have been anywhere near. My stomach dropped. And then, during lunch, I overheard something that made my pulse spike so hard I had to sit down. Evan and our manager were in one of the glass conference rooms. The door wasn't fully closed. Their voices carried. I only caught pieces. Once she's phased out. Your version looks cleaner. We just need her documentation before what? Before they replaced me. Before they took credit for my systems. Before I became disposable. That's when it clicked. The second username in the tracer. The secret meetings. The sudden task reassignments. This wasn't incompetence anymore. This was planning. And it wasn't just Evan. My hands shook. My entire body went cold. Because the betrayal I thought I was dealing with wasn't the real betrayal at all. Something much bigger was happening. And I was the only one who didn't know the rules of the game they were playing. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those words again. Once she's phased out. We just need her documentation before. By Tuesday morning, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining anything. There was a plan, and I was the target. I just didn't know how far it went. I walked into the office early, hoping to get a quiet hour before everyone else showed up. But when I opened my inbox, my breath caught in my throat. I had been removed from 3 more projects. No explanation, no justification. My pulse hammered as I scrolled down to the next email. Access revoked. Internal dev folder tier 2. This was a folder I built. A folder I maintained. A folder Evan had cried about not being able to handle just 2 weeks earlier. I shot up from my chair. This wasn't just bad management. This wasn't just favoritism. This was a setup. I marched straight to my manager's office. The door was half closed, but I pushed it open. He was sitting there with Evan. They were reviewing one of my architectural maps, one I kept in a private directory. Evan was gesturing across it with a pen like it was his masterpiece. I stared at the paper, at the handwriting, at the color coding. It was mine, every bit of it. My manager looked up, pretend surprised. Oh, didn't know you were coming in early. I pointed to the printout. Why do you have that? He didn't even blink. We're consolidating workflows. Evan will be leading the next phase. My stomach twisted. Leading, I said quietly. You gave him lead on the system I built? Evan didn't look up. Didn't say a word. Just kept flipping papers, pretending he wasn't the center of the storm. My manager gave this condescending sigh. We need fresh direction. Evan's vision aligns more with where we want to go. I stared at him, stunned. What vision? He's been copying my work for weeks. Let's be professional, he said sharply, like I was the one being unreasonable. And then he delivered the knife. We're also evaluating your long-term fit. HR will be reaching out for a discussion. Long-term fit. HR discussion. Project removal. Access revoked. It all lined up. I stepped out of the office because I genuinely thought I might scream. My hands were trembling so hard I had to lean on the wall just to steady myself. I needed air. I walked down to the lobby, barely aware of the people around me. And that's when my phone buzzed, a push notification from the tracer system. Someone had edited the critical file again. Unauthorized, early morning. No review ticket. I opened the log, and my heart nearly stopped. Evan's username. And my manager's again. Both of them, together, inside the same file. The file that controlled our entire upcoming deployment. My vision blurred for a second. The tracer didn't just prove they were tampering, it proved they were coordinating. I needed to see exactly what they had done, so I rushed back upstairs and opened the diff. And that's when I saw it. They didn't just break things by accident. They didn't misunderstand the architecture. They didn't make sloppy junior mistakes. No, they had intentionally rerouted credit, stripped out my signatures, and overwritten key sections of the logic with code that didn't even function. Lines that Evan had copied from my private directories. Comments I had written. Structures I had designed. All rewritten to look like his. It wasn't incompetence. It was theft. But the real twist The part that made my head spin came from the timestamp. The edits happened before I confronted them, before the meeting, before they told me I was being phased out. They had been planning to replace me weeks before I ever suspected anything. Evan's entire training wasn't onboarding. It was extraction. They didn't hire him to help the team. They hired him to become me, and they were almost done. The worst part? By the look of the logs, they were rushing to finish the job before the big client deliverable. And if the file broke again, if the deployment failed at scale, they were going to pin it on me. Everything I had feared was true, but much deeper, colder, and more calculated than I ever imagined. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands over my mouth, realizing they weren't just trying to replace me. They were trying to destroy my credibility on purpose, and I had one choice left: to let it happen, or to flip the entire script on them. I didn't go back to my desk right away. I sat there in that empty conference room staring at Evan's edits, the tracer logs, the timelines, the lies, the subtle pushes to isolate me. It all formed a single, sharp truth. They weren't just replacing me, they were building a case to fire me. And they wanted to use my own system to do it. But the thing about building a trap for someone who designed the cage, sometimes the bars snap back. I took a long breath and closed the diff viewer. My hands steadied. My heartbeat slowed. Something in me clicked into a place I didn't even know existed, cold, precise, calculating. Not petty, not emotional, just done. If they wanted a war built on documentation, logs, and accountability, fine, I would give them exactly that. But I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to warn them. I wasn't even going to tell a single friend what I was planning. Revenge isn't rage. Revenge is control. First step, print everything. I exported every tracer log they didn't know existed, every unauthorized edit, every timestamp showing they were inside directories they never should have touched. I saved screenshots of the Slack messages where they reassigned my tasks without justification. I organized the commit comparisons showing my original code next to Evan's copied versions. Then I dug into the access logs, the ones buried so deep in our internal system that even most seniors don't know how to find them. And sure enough, my manager had used admin credentials to grant Evan elevated access. No ticket, no approval chain, no record outside the raw system logs, illegal access under our company's audit policy. Straight up fireable. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Next step, zip and encrypt everything, hard copy and digital, 2 USB drives, 1 personal cloud vault they couldn't touch. Then I set up the kill switch. It wasn't destructive. I wasn't sabotaging anything. But I added one single line to the system, one conditional that would surface the tracer in the exact moment someone tried to pin blame on me. A self-defending breadcrumb trail. If anyone claimed I caused a failure, the system would automatically generate a report showing every unauthorized change and the usernames responsible. I didn't even need to expose it manually. The architecture would do it for me. That's the beauty of building something clean. It knows its creator. When the environment failed, and I knew it would, because Evan and my manager had mangled the logic, the tracer would fire off the full audit chain. But that wasn't enough. I wanted witnesses. So I scheduled a meeting request for the afternoon, timed perfectly with the deployment deadline, and invited the director, HR, and the 2 PMs, not my manager. Not Evan. The subject line, Critical System Integrity Review before Client Handoff. No explanation, just enough to make every leader nervous. I spent the next hour preparing my face. My tone, my posture, I needed to look calm. Tired maybe, but steady. Revenge isn't a blow-up. It's not screaming. It's not petty payback. Revenge is the moment you hold someone's career by the throat and they don't even know your hand is there. Just before the meeting started, I walked to the kitchen for water. Evan was at the counter, bragging to another coworker about being trusted with more responsibility. He saw me and smirked. "You okay?" he asked, fake sympathetic. "You look stressed." I held his gaze until the smirk faltered. "I'm fine," I said. "Are you?" He blinked. Something flickered in his expression, a flash of something that almost looked like fear. Like he sensed something underneath my voice that didn't match the old me. Then the PA system pinged the meeting reminder. He didn't know what was coming. Neither did my manager. But I did. And the satisfying part wasn't the impending collapse of their scheme. It was knowing they had walked themselves into the pit they dug for me, voluntarily, eagerly, clueless, and the fall was about to begin. The director, HR, and the PMs all filed into the conference room right on time. I had my laptop closed, my notes stacked neatly, everything looking calm and controlled. My heartbeat was steady in that strange way it gets when you already know the outcome of the storm. But the first twist of the afternoon hit before I even opened my mouth. My manager and Evan walked in, uninvited. They just slid into the room like they belonged there. My manager gave the director a tight smile. "We figured we should be part of this, since we've been leading the new direction." Leading, right. But what made my stomach drop wasn't them showing up. It was the director's reaction. Instead of being annoyed or confused, he nodded. "Good. You two will need to hear this." That's when I realized something I hadn't expected at all. The director already knew something was wrong. Not because of me, not because of the tracer, but because someone else had complained. And that someone wasn't on my radar. I didn't have long to think about it, because HR jumped right in with their usual cold, polished tone. "We were told there was a concern about system ownership and access. We hope this meeting will help clear the air." Told by who? Not me. My manager shifted in his seat. Evan looked confused, then nervous. I kept my expression neutral. The director nodded at me. "You called the meeting. Start wherever you need to." I opened my laptop slowly. But before I could click anything, the PM, Jordan, spoke up. And what he said changed everything. "I need to clarify something," he said, looking directly at my manager. "Last week, Evan emailed me a system diagram and claimed it was his original design. But I recognized the handwriting from the whiteboard sketches we've seen her make." He pointed at me. Evan's face drained of color. My manager's jaw twitched. Jordan continued, voice calm but firm. "I didn't believe he drew it, so I asked him to explain the logic behind one section." He paused. "He couldn't at all." The room fell dead silent. I stared at him, stunned. Jordan had never even hinted that he'd noticed anything. He always looked stressed and exhausted, like he barely had time to breathe, let alone investigate office politics. But he had been watching. Not everything, just enough. And he hadn't said anything until now because he'd been waiting for the right moment. The director leaned forward. "Is that true?" My manager tried to speak, but Evan beat him to it, his voice cracking. I mean, I knew her layout already, so maybe I mixed it up." "You presented it as your own," Jordan pressed. "You even added your initials at the bottom." That part hit me in the chest. Initials. He'd forged his name onto my work. The air in the room snapped with tension. But that wasn't the twist, not the real one. The real twist came next, when the director turned to me and said something that shifted the ground under every single person in that room. It flagged something unusual this morning. "There have been repeated admin-level access changes to your permissions without formal approval. We traced the changes, and your account wasn't the only one touched." He paused. "We were coming to you this afternoon regardless of your meeting invite." My breath halted. They already knew. They had already found the unauthorized access, the secret edits, the tampering, not because of Evan, not because of my manager, not because of me, because someone in it had been quietly monitoring them, for weeks. The director continued, his voice colder now. "This isn't just a workflow concern. This is a compliance breach." Evan swallowed hard. My manager sat very still, but the director wasn't finished. "And the most concerning part," he said slowly, "is that the access trail shows coordination between both of you." He pointed at my manager, then at Evan. The room seemed to tilt. HR stiffened. The PMs stared. But me, I felt a rush of something dark and steady wash through me. Vindication. And then, because the universe is occasionally poetic, the deployment alarm pinged across the room. The system had failed, catastrophically. Every eye in the room turned toward the screen behind them. My manager blinked. Evan froze. The director looked straight at me. "Do you know what happened?" I opened the file. The tracer activated on its own, exactly as designed. The audit report began generating line by line. And when the final page loaded, the entire conference room saw it. The unauthorized edits. The tampered logic. The broken variables. The exact timestamps. The usernames, both of them, not me, them. For a full 10 seconds, nobody spoke. Then my manager whispered, barely audible, "What is that?" I closed the laptop gently. It's the integrity tracer. I built it to protect the system from unauthorized changes. Evan's voice cracked. You made that. No, I said quietly. I built the system, all of it. I just built one extra piece to watch what you two were doing. The director exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. HR's face had gone bone white. Jordan leaned back in his chair, stunned. But for me, this was only the beginning. Because the worst truth, the darkest one, still hadn't been revealed. And when it came out, it would change everything about what they did to me, and why. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the projector. Evan looked like he was going to pass out. My manager sat completely still, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. But the director wasn't done, not even close. He leaned back in his chair and said, "We've been reviewing a few things related to your performance reviews." He was staring straight at my manager now, not me, and something didn't add up. HR cleared her throat, clearly rattled. Yes, specifically, why the documentation over the last 6 months doesn't match the performance metrics being submitted. I felt a small flicker of confusion. I hadn't known about this part. My manager shifted uncomfortably. What documentation? The director didn't blink. Yours. He pulled up a folder on the screen, and suddenly I went cold because I recognized them. Performance reports, work logs, ticket summaries, but all of them were doctored, rewritten. Edited, stamped with my name, but stripped of actual detail. Missing entire projects. Missing deliverables. Missing contributions. My contributions. Everything I had done for half a year was reduced to vague lines like supported team tasks, assisted with documentation, reviewed junior work. They made me sound like an intern. HR spoke again, her voice tight. These were submitted by your manager, signed and certified as accurate. My manager swallowed, but he didn't deny it. Not even a little. And that's when the director added the part that made my stomach flip. We cross-referenced these with your actual output logs, he said, nodding toward me. The actual work you completed was triple what was reported. Triple. A weight pressed into my chest. Months of exhaustion suddenly made sense, but the director's expression darkened. We found something else, he continued quietly. A pattern, he clicked again. Another folder opened. My name, attached to dozens of negative evaluation notes, all written by my manager, all marked private, all flagged as justification for future role reassignment. I stared at the screen, stunned. I felt hollow. My hands went pins and needles numb. HR spoke next, her voice shaking now. These were not part of any official review cycle. They were personal notes submitted only to upper management. The director looked at my manager. You didn't tell her she was under performance scrutiny. Scrutiny? I had no idea. No warnings, no conversations, nothing. My manager let out a long breath and finally spoke, his voice low and bitter. She wasn't going to last here. She's too quiet, too isolated. She doesn't fit the culture. She doesn't have leadership potential. Evan does, leadership potential. That stupid word. The one HR had used. Vibe, but he wasn't finished. He leaned forward, and for the first time since all this started, I saw the truth in his eyes. Cold, calculated, cruel. She's competent, sure, he said. But not promotable. People like her get stuck. They bog teams down. They don't inspire anyone. I needed someone with presence. Someone like Evan. My throat went dry. This isn't about the work, he continued. It's about value. She does tasks. Evan brings visibility. That's what leadership looks like. Visibility. Not skill, not output, not integrity. Visibility. I felt sick. He kept going, and every word was a knife. You think doing a lot of work makes you indispensable, he said to me directly. That's naive. Nobody sees it. Nobody cares. People like you burn out and fade. People like him get promoted. He said it casually, like it was obvious, like I should have known all along. But the worst, and the part that chilled me all the way into my spine, came next. He looked right at HR, then the director, then back at me. I was phasing her out because quiet workers are replaceable. If she quit, fine. If she failed publicly, even better. Either way, we'd get the documentation we needed before letting her go. He didn't deny any of it. He didn't even look ashamed, because he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. To him, I wasn't a person. I was output, a resource, a placeholder until Evan could wear my skin convincingly enough to take over. In his mind, it wasn't betrayal. It was strategy. The director stared at him like he was looking at something rotten. HR had gone pale. The PMs looked horrified. But me, I felt something settle quietly inside my chest. Not anger. Not shock, just clarity. Because now I finally understood the real reason for everything. He wasn't trying to ruin my career. He was trying to erase me. Deliberately. Efficiently. Systematically. And he had almost succeeded. Almost. But he didn't understand one thing. When you strip a person down to nothing, when you rip away credit, when you corner them and cut off every path, they don't disappear. They sharpen. And that's when revenge becomes inevitable. The moment my manager finished talking, that cold, smug explanation about visibility and replaceable quiet workers, the entire room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in this slow, deliberate way, like everyone finally understood exactly what kind of predator they were sitting next to. And that's when I knew I had them. All of them. HR closed her laptop with this sharp click and stared at him like he'd crawled out of a sewer. The director rubbed his temples slowly. The PMs looked disgusted. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. The director finally broke the silence. "We need a moment. Please step outside." Not to me, to my manager and Evan. They both froze, stunned that they were the ones being kicked out, but the director didn't blink. Now, they left, shutting the door behind them. Evan's face was blotchy red. My manager looked like someone had punched a hole straight through his chest. When the door clicked shut, HR let out a breath like she'd been holding it for weeks. The director turned to me. "What you showed today, that tracer, the logs, all of it is damning. We had no idea the situation was this severe." Then HR added, voice low and steady, "We will need full copies of everything. If what you have matches what we found, this becomes a compliance case plus misconduct investigation." Translation: they were screwed. But I wasn't finished. I opened my laptop and slid a USB across the table. That has the complete tracer audit, access logs, and original file versions. The encrypted backup is already in legal's inbox. The system will regenerate the report anytime someone tries to alter history. The PMs just stared at me. The director leaned forward. "You protected the company from a catastrophic breach today." I didn't respond. I wasn't in the mood to comfort anyone. HR cleared her throat gently. "We will be taking immediate action. As of today, both Evan and your manager will be suspended pending investigation." Suspended? Not enough. The director must have read my expression. "Let the process play out. Trust me, this will not end well for them." But I wasn't waiting for that emotional payout. I wanted control, real control. So I said the one thing none of them expected. "I want everything in writing, every log, every decision, every resolution, and I want a new title with back pay, retroactive." Silence. Then the director nodded slowly, like he was deciding whether to fight me or surrender. He chose correctly. "You'll have it by tomorrow," he said. "And we'll be offering you a retention bonus for preventing what could have been a multi-million-dollar failure." HR nodded. "We're very serious about making this right." I believed them, not because they were good people, but because they were scared. Scared of lawsuits. Scared of audit violations. Scared of everything my evidence could expose if they mishandled this. For the first time in months, I had the leverage, and I planned to use every ounce of it. When they brought Evan and my manager back in, HR delivered the suspensions with corporate politeness that felt almost surgical. Evan looked like he was about to cry. My manager opened his mouth like he might defend himself, then closed it, realizing there was nothing left to stand on. They escorted both out of the building. I didn't watch them leave. Instead, I went back to my desk, packed my bag slowly, and walked out into the warm Dallas air. For the first time in a long time, my chest felt lighter. The next morning, I received everything I asked for. New title, Senior Systems Architect, 14 months of back pay, adjusted to the new salary tier. A retention bonus, a public department-wide announcement, crediting me for critical infrastructure recovery and modernization. 2 weeks later, I heard the final verdict. My manager was fired. Evan was terminated and reported to future employer background services for falsifying work. They didn't go quietly. They tried to pin things on me, tried to spin the narrative. Didn't matter. The tracer had them by the throat. The company asked if I wanted to stay longer term. I stayed long enough to collect every dime they owed me, long enough to rebuild the system to a state where no one could ever weaponize it again. Then I left, on my own terms, for a fully remote role at a Houston startup that respected me from day one. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the look on my manager's face when the tracer logs hit the screen. That mix of shock, panic, and dawning comprehension. That was the moment he realized the truth. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet doesn't mean blind. Quiet doesn't mean disposable. Quiet means calculating. Quiet means observing. Quiet means waiting. And in the end, quiet is the last thing you hear right before everything you built to trap someone collapses on you.